Chapter 1195. Ever since he became an ascender, Huaishur could be considered to have seen the world. From the beginning until now, he had fought from the present realm to hell and back again. He had secured so many victories and obtained so many results. Now he could more or less be considered to be a top figure. However, he had never experienced such a huge battle. If things really came to a head, it would be a lie if he did not feel uneasy. During this period of time, he had been running all over the border, acting as a tool to put out fires everywhere. However, they were all urgent special missions, such as the defense of local conflicts, the transportation of confidential goods, the guarantee of supply of resources, the elimination of aerial threats. He was far from having that much experience in such a large-scale war. Even if he knew what he should do and understood how to deal with various situations, now was not the time to break through the defense line. He himself was the defense line, so how the hell was he going to break through? He had the geographical advantage, but he had lost the mobility that he had always been used to. It was impossible for him to just leave if he could not win, even if the first sequence had dozens of support points now. And even without the Tower of Glory, it would not be in imminent danger. However, if he really lost such an important place, even if Huaishur did not die, he would probably have to pack his luggage and go home. In such a situation, it was natural for him to panic. It would be a problem if he did not panic. Anyone in Huaishur's position would have panicked as well. However, since Richard felt that he could do it, and the feathered serpent also felt that he could do it, he would not belittle himself and think that he did not have the ability to bear this responsibility. I'm Yun Zhongjuan, and I don't even need to pay to eat in a restaurant in the Gaia fragment. What's wrong with eating a watermelon in the Thunderbolt Sea? Thus, the wind blew and the rain fell. The days passed as usual. Huaishur did not lack in the slightest. He was not afraid that the other party would target him and seek revenge in the future. Since he was already an MT, he had to pull the aggro more steadily. He was not afraid of the other party attacking him, but he was afraid that the other party would ignore him. As the first sequence of the Solano defense line, the important unit that faced the enemy directly at the front, the Tower of Glory could not be left alone. Instead, it was directly connected to the defense line itself, forming a fulcrum of firepower like a bastion. Apart from the guardian Huaishur and his mascot adjutant, there were also 6 scholars and 14 ascendants, as well as hundreds of soldiers. The scholars were responsible for maintaining the framework and laws of the tower. Apart from that, the Tower of Glory itself was responsible for ensuring the safety of the tower. All kinds of equipment and weapons were continuously moved into the tower and connected to the array, causing the dark clouds above the Tower of Glory to grow thicker and thicker. The tempest that Huaishur had been nurturing for half a month now had a faint scarlet color in the darkness. Even though it was suspended high in the sky, not moving at all, it still made people feel stifled and uneasy. However, to the Allies, this uneasiness was a source of stability. After all, the stronger their own people were, the safer they would be. Everyone knew that. However, the only inconvenience was that this damned place was too damp in this hot and dry desert border. Except for the isolation room where important equipment was installed, the humidity in the Tower of Glory was almost off the charts. Moreover, there was a drizzle every hour. At night, there was no need to even keep watch, because layers of white fog had completely engulfed the area around the Tower of Glory. During this period of time, the Crystal Squad had never been so comfortable. There was no need to patrol, no need to respond to signals and run hundreds or thousands of kilometers for emergency rescue, and no need to be suddenly awakened by alarms in the middle of the night. Even though the remaining tasks were equally heavy compared to the previous days, it was as if they had stepped into a gentle retirement life in advance. Although they knew that war was close at hand, this group of heartless people still changed into underpants during their shifts and ran to the ditch behind the Tower of Glory to play diving. It was as if they had come to a water park. Although sometimes Sandra would get too excited and evaporate half the water in the pond with a punch, blowing away the people in it. It was quite fun at other times. Sometimes at night, there would be other squads carrying beach chairs, stereos, and various other things over, and everyone would have a barbecue together. And at the top of the tower, Huaisher sat in his usual position, looking at the figures not far away who surrounded the fire and enjoyed beer while quietly enjoying the wind. After a long time, he looked back at Crystal 1 to 7 behind him. "Are you sure you don't want to go down and take a look?" Crystal 1 to 7 shook his head silently and lowered his head to continue wiping his power armor. Ever since Huaisher helped him repair the damaged parts of the kinetic skeleton, he had been wiping this thing every day. Just like the bartender in the bar, he would never get tired of wiping it. As the captain of the squad, Crystal 1 to 7 had a prestige that was difficult for others to reach in the eyes of his own team members. Huaisher felt that even he might not be able to compare with him. After all, he was just a person who came out of nowhere, and Crystal 1 to 7, to them, was the officer who had accompanied him through fire and water, and had saved him many times from quagmires. However, despite this, he still seemed to deliberately keep a distance from his team members and did not participate in their lives more deeply. Similarly, he also kept his own. He still maintained the work and rest habits of the former Crystal Squad. He did not slack off because he was the last survivor, but he also did not force the new team members to keep up with this set of overly harsh standards outside of the daily training. And those cumbersome armor maintenance and boring training day after day seemed to be the only link left between him and his former comrades who had passed away. For the rest of the time, he had nothing to do to kill time. It was as if he was waiting for something. Waiting for war or death. "Do you want a can?" Huaisher took out a can of beer from the box at his feet. It was the offering that Sandra would occasionally remember that she still had a superior after looting the parties below. Now, Huaisher casually shook it, and a layer of ice crystals climbed onto the body of the bottle. It was cool and refreshing. Crystal 1 to 7 did not pretend to be indifferent. He took it, raised his head, and drank half of the can, and let out a long breath. "Phew, refreshing. Thank you, sir." "Why do I always feel that you don't like to talk?" Huaisher asked curiously. "Is it my imagination?" "The rule of the Iron Cast Legion is silence, sir." Crystal 1 to 7 replied. "Soldiers only need to carry out orders and do not need to speak. From the beginning of the new recruit service until they are transferred to other departments, we have been taught this. They say that the more you speak, the more mistakes you make." Among the 4 major legions of the Astronomical Association, the Iron Cast Legion was the largest in number. It was even many times more than the other legions combined. Unlike the other legions with their own functions, the Iron Cast Legion did everything except for frontal assaults on the battlefield. They were like universal tools. They had the largest number of soldiers, and at the same time, they sacrificed the most. Compared to Huaisher, a newcomer who came out of nowhere, they were the real veterans and the important cornerstone of the border defense line. Those wars and hardships did not defeat him. Even if the other victims had already passed away, Crystal Lattice 1 to 7 still retained some of the characteristics of the past. Calm and firm, like real steel, unshakable. Even if the sky fell and the earth cracked, with such a companion, everyone would feel at ease from the bottom of their hearts. "To be honest, I originally wanted to let you relax a little, but you don't seem to need this boring care." Huaisher sighed and handed over another can of beer. "As half an old acquaintance, I want to do something for you, but I'm afraid you don't need it. So, I'm afraid the only thing I can guarantee is that beer is enough. Beer is enough. The corners of Crystal 1-7's mouth seemed to curl up slightly. Thank you for always remembering them, Mr. Huaisher. Huaisher did not answer, because he was not sure whether he remembered them or not. That was just a short encounter on the Stellaris. They wore combat goggles and masks, and their entire bodies were covered in armor, not revealing any part of their faces. In those 20 minutes, other than the logo on their shoulders, there was nothing left for Huaisher to remember. Now that he recalled, there was only one name left, Crystal Squad. They were 1-to-1-to-1-to-13. As for their names, gender, age, those materials had long been sealed in the secrecy administration of the Command and Control Bureau, waiting for the pile of old paper to wither and rot little by little. Perhaps one day they would be able to see the light of day again after 60 or 70 years. Did this count as remembering? They were all nameless people, just like the people who had sacrificed themselves in the war, no different from the huge sacrifices of the past. It was difficult to even be remembered. It's really difficult to make people remember names. Huaisher sighed softly. Don't you feel sad? We didn't come here to be remembered, sir. Crystal 1-7 calmly replied. From the recruit camp to the Cast Iron Legion, we had 6 opportunities to quit, but there were very few people who gave up each time. My instructor once told me that there will always be an end, but sometimes the end will be more meaningful. He pulled open his collar, revealing the black tattoo on his collarbone, which made Huaisher stunned. Yu Dongri once told him that among the 4 great legions, apart from the Orphans of Martyrs, one of the most important sources of soldiers was the existence that was jokingly called the Atonement Army. The Command and Control Bureau had a department that was responsible for selecting people in the dark corners of the entire territory, opening the door for many prisoners and criminals. They would carefully evaluate the situation of each selected person, and if you were judged to be worth saving, then the doors of the 4 great legions would open to you, and you would have the opportunity to atone for your sins. Let your mud-like, trash life once again have meaning. As you can see, I wasn't born a righteous person. Crystal 1-7 leaned against the armor behind him and whispered self-deprecatingly, I made some mistakes, some unforgivable mistakes, so much so that I lost everything. Some people told me that people can stand up again, but I don't believe it because things like forgiveness and rebirth are too far away for me. He paused and said seriously, but if there's a chance to become a hero, who wouldn't want it? Even if he was forgotten, it didn't matter. This was the first time Huaisher saw Crystal 1-7 smile, so relieved that he was speechless. Yes, who wouldn't want it? Didn't he also have unrealistic dreams to reach where he was now? Let's drink to the heroes. He raised his beer. Cheers. Crystal 1-7 raised his beer and drank it in one gulp. Under the dark clouds, they quietly looked at the bonfire in the distance, shared the last of their beer, and enjoyed the last of their leisure and time. After a long time, the light of the bonfire gradually dimmed. Apart from the guards on duty, everyone fell into a deep sleep, and in the latter half of the night, Huaisher opened his eyes from the chair. The alarm sounded. The wind of war blew from the distance. Chapter 1196. At first, when the hurricane started, the sentries patrolling the defensive line thought that it was a normal change in weather. But when the high-pitched sound of the horn came from the wind, he could not help but change his expression and press the emergency alarm button. When the deployment of the Thunder Sea blew the call of conquest, it was the final declaration of the destruction of the army before they pressed on the border. They didn't hide their greedy ambitions and ferocious goals, and they empathized with the prophecy of destruction. Now, when the horn sounded, the darkness that had been suppressed in the corner of the border began to surge. It was as if it was boiling. Against the suppression of Solano's defensive line, It quickly surged, expanded, and expanded. It was as if a torrent of ink was about to dye the entire world black. A thick smell of blood gradually appeared in the wind, bringing with it the stench of decay and death. Continuous cracking sounds echoed in the air. It was as if an invisible fuse had been torn apart. It caused the earth to tremble abruptly. Dazzling radiance shot out from the cracks and rose towards the heavens. 1, 2, 3. Innumerable pillars of light stood before the expanding darkness like a cage, firmly suppressing the expansion of hell. However, very quickly, when the horn sounded from the lava and the mountains, the light barrier began to distort rapidly, as if it was being pulled by an invisible force. Then, it completely collapsed. The weak light dissipated into the darkness, never to be seen again. The flood of disaster rushed straight in. At the peak of the mountains, the steel-like dwarf lifted the horn that was hundreds of meters long and blew it with all his might. His bulging chest gradually dried up, and his soul seemed to leave his body along with his breath. The bloodthirsty horn greedily absorbed the origin substance and disaster, causing the sound of destruction to echo. It moved forward, trampling on every soul, and even pulling. It pulled those souls into the eternal hole in the horn. Unfortunately, it was useless. Under the suppression of the 3 great seals, even the might of the Sea of Lightning could not compare to the quality of the entire realm. Every soul that was connected to the Silver Ocean felt their minds sway when they heard the sound of the horn. However, only traces of source substance evaporated from their consciousness. Before they could dissipate, they were absorbed into Solano's framework under the support of the framework. Countless streaks of origin substance floated above Solano's defensive line, making half of the night sky seem even more dazzling, just like the jewels on a beauty's neck. In the metal hall, the Archduke of the demonic mountain sat on his throne, with his eyes lowered. His massive body was like a rock, and his eyes were filled with suppressed killing intent and greed. The time for punitive expedition has arrived. A deep voice echoed through the mountains. Take it and give it to me. As a result, the black tide between the mountains surged. Countless large groups of creatures roared and surged towards the light of the present realm amidst the sound of the horn. Right at the back of Solano's defense line, an ear-piercing alarm echoed. In the military intelligence room, continuous orders were sent out the moment the horn sounded. The entire silent defense line was operating with a low rumble. Blazing light rose into the sky, turning the night into day. The war plan was already in motion. Everything unfolded in an orderly manner. However, when everyone was rushing to exchange information, the chair in the middle was empty. Only the adjutant stood calmly beside the empty chair and used the authority of the commander to stamp Richard's emblem and seal on each order. Don't panic. The adjutant hugged his military cap. His white hair glowed with the color of iron under the light. His expression was calm. His Excellency has already given the order. Do what you need to do. I'll leave the matters here to you. As if they were already used to the unreliability of the adjutant, the subordinates shrugged with a bitter smile and threw themselves into the busy military intelligence and deployment. The entire base had been boiled into a pot of porridge by the invisible fire. The strict formation, the speeding convoy, and even those who carried heavy equipment to the front line were like blood flowing through the veins, rushing to their designated places. Now, in the empty dining hall after the lights were off, there was only a burly figure sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Quietly looking at the darkness and fire in the distant night sky, he smoked a cigarette calmly. Next to the ashtray on the table, there was a bottle of freshly opened tequila. The bear god Richard. What a good weather for hunting. The old man touched the short stubble on his chin and sighed. You think so too, don't you? Beside his feet, The exaggeratedly huge hammer vibrated excitedly. Wisps of scarlet seeped out from the runes. It could not wait any longer. "Wait, baby," Richard stroked the handle of the hammer and whispered softly, "Wait a little longer." So he waited, and Huaishur was also waiting for the tide to swallow him. When the world of darkness stepped forward, and all the darkness that could be seen from afar was coming toward him, the endless enemies gathered into formations, and the formations formed waves, and countless waves turned into tides. Galloping in the hurricane, he realized how small he was. Like dust. Is this war? At the top of the Tower of Glory, Huaishur sighed softly. It's so magnificent. It's so beautiful. Now, the darkness was rippling in front of him. Endless malice and calamity formed a tide of war, and the endless army of hell surged toward Solano. It stirred up a suffocating wind. In this brief moment of absent-mindedness, Huaishur could not help but feel an indescribable sense of beauty in this magnificent scene. It was as if F***CK. A shocked shout sounded in his ears. Chandra exclaimed in shock, "So many!" She paused for a moment, shocked by this magnificent scene, nodded, and added, "So many!" In the silence, Huaishur looked back speechlessly and stopped talking. After a long time, he waved his hand helplessly. "Forget it. Let her be. As long as you're happy." In the stinking wind, a faint rumbling sound could be heard. Just in the middle of the tide, a huge silhouette slowly rose. Dozens of giant beasts that were hundreds of meters tall struggled to drill through the mud. Through the mud, they crossed a long distance and appeared again in the formation. Their half-human, half-beast posture was so ferocious. The moment they appeared, there was a fierce chill or fire spreading, shrouding their heads and feet. Mountain dragons! The demon dragon army raised by the Grand Duke of Demon Mountain had entered the battlefield. In one go, hundreds of mountain dragons that could destroy all the city walls were thrown into this attack. Now, the mountain dragons were slowly moving forward with their many giant legs and thick snake bellies. Under the protection of countless large groups, they approached the defense line, step by step. 30 kilometers. In the observation room of the Tower of Glory, the engineering soldier shouted hoarsely. Huaishur was indifferent and did not move, but behind the Tower of Glory, the huge cannons that stood like a forest had already burst out with angry roars. On the ground, hundreds of beautiful flames grew in an instant. Heavy cannonballs cut through the night sky that was mixed with light and darkness, crossing a long distance and falling from the sky. Then, mushroom-like sparks grew out of the sticky and dark tide of hell. The spreading flames illuminated the ferocious faces. In the bloody wind, the large group became more and more restless and increased their speed. 20 kilometers. Under the long-range attacks of the cannons, countless mines buried in the ground were constantly triggered. Terrifying flame tornadoes rose from the ground. In the blink of an eye, countless large groups of people were engulfed and turned into ashes. But there were more waves coming out of the flames. The screaming monsters rolled on the ground and crawled with difficulty, not daring to slow down. And the trash that slowed down were completely trampled by the army and completely turned into minced meat. At the front, the burning mountain dragon hissed, opened its mouth, and spat out flames. But then the cannonballs from the sky pierced into the big mouth. After 2 flicks of the fingers, in the expanding flames, the flesh bombs exploded, and scarlet spread. The mutilated corpse fell. However, more thirsty monsters sped up. Just behind them, in the domain of hell, the huge cannons between the mountains also began to bombard the area without mercy. One by one, giant eyes opened from the secret apparatus. Strange rays of light and cannon fire crisscrossed in the night sky. The dazzling light brushed past the Tower of Glory and smashed into the defensive line, but was neutralized by the shield that suddenly rose up. Only the hurricane swept through. 10, 15 kilometers. The engineering soldier's voice began to tremble. In the eyes of ordinary people, the terrifying scale that was enough to make one's soul tremble had been completely included in the eyes. In the domain of hell, the lava in the mountains spewed out. Huge snakes or strange bubble-like monsters slowly crawled out of the volcanic craters, spread their wings, or stretched their bodies. They flew into the sky. Gradually, they covered the dark sky and sped towards Solano's defense line. They were even faster than the large groups that could only be used to attract firepower. Countless scarlet giant snakes with wings on their backs had already arrived at the defense line like lightning, hissing and spitting venom or breathing. Countless black dots crawled on their backs like ants. Now, those black dots shook off their bodies and hissed at the enemies below, jumping out excitedly. Boom! A deafening explosion burst out from not far away. The Tower of Synergy, before the approaching hell array. It finally couldn't help but fire the first shot. The frost spread all over the sky and instantly froze dozens of giant snakes, tearing their bodies apart. But there were more giant snakes coming from afar. 9, no, 8, 8.4, 8.3, 8 kilometers. Huaishur was indifferent and did not move. The mutilated snake corpse fell in front of him. In a short moment, the shattered eyes reflected the expressionless face, only calmness. More giant towers shone and roared. After being given the freedom to fire, the moment the enemy touched the edge of the fire area, countless destructive lights sprinkled down towards the endless black tide. The Tower of Glory was silent. The surging dark clouds shrouded the top of the Tower of Glory, and wisps of scarlet appeared in the darkness. Under the light of countless rays and cannons, he looked down and watched the approaching black tide. The lighter turned slowly at the tip of his finger, like the needle of a clock, waiting. More light and destruction sprinkled down from both sides, but the supporting cannons could not completely cover the gap in the Tower of Glory. Amidst the sirens, a puzzled voice came from the Tower of Flow. Huaishur, Huaishur, are you there? The voice echoed. Please answer if you copy. I'm here, Huaishur said. Everything is normal, don't worry. What are you still hesitating for? The supporting allies asked angrily. Stop dawdling. Don't worry, wait a little longer. Huaishur replied, I suggest you wait a little longer too. Wait! At the top of the Tower of Flow, the middle-aged man paused for a moment and looked back in surprise. Dozens of kilometers away, he looked at Huaishur's side profile. Wait for what? Wait for the wind. Huaishur looked back at him and answered softly. 3 kilometers. The report of the engineer was like a sharp cry, trembling. At that moment, the spinning lighter at Huaishur's fingertip paused slightly. He looked up at the sky. Then, the wind came. Above the vault of heaven, the huge rain clouds were emitting thunderous roars, as if they were alive. Under the will of Yun Zhongjuan, the hurricane that had been brewing for a long time burst out of thin air. Wild waves spread from the air and turned into a spreading gale. It swept up countless dust and sand and flew towards the tide in the distance. The tide, gathered by countless large groups of hell, paused for a moment under the blowing of the hurricane. But then these insignificant difficulties were overcome. Compared to the harsh weather in hell, it was simply a breeze. The sound of fighting to their heart's content rang out in front of them. Amidst their frenzied cries, they madly charged forward, brandishing their sharp claws and swords. Countless monsters surged forward. Then, without a sound, they collapsed. Like a field of wheat in the wind, ripples of destruction rose up. Because the wind of death was blowing, The wind blew for tens of thousands of kilometers. When the visible wind blew along the entire line of defense, the invisible wind caused the tide of hell to turn into stagnant water. Countless strains of bacteria began to rapidly multiply and mutate amidst the blood and origin substances of the calamity. They took root in every body of flesh and soul, quickly spreading throughout the area. The invisible tide of plague had already been swept up by the hurricane, enveloping countless large groups. From the droplets, from the blood, from the breathing, from the sight, and from the will, the tide of plague was madly increasing at an exponential rate. Over the past half a month, after collecting countless deaths and fresh blood, the vicious poison in the dark clouds had now transformed into an invisible tide that flowed against the tide, covering everything in sight. It caused breathing to stop, the heart to stop, the lungs to stiffen, and the blood to congeal. Death. The invisible death spread. 1, 2, 4, 8. The rapidly decaying monsters expanded and exploded at a rate visible to the naked eye. Immediately after, countless grass seeds took root, grew, and sprouted from the flesh. Green grass and flowers bloomed everywhere. The cruel battlefield turned into a gentle paradise. Everything was as beautiful as heaven. A refreshing fragrance spread between the white bones and the scarlet. Colorful fungi crawled over the waxy faces as pestilence, dressed in colorful clothes, walked through the garden of death, smiling brightly at the tourists who stepped into it. Meanwhile, at the Solano line of defense, the first line of defense fell into silence. The enemies who had originally been at the city gates were silently annihilated in an instant, and the chain of disasters continued to spread among the countless large groups. For the time being, there was no need to open fire. At this moment, everyone looked around in shock at the terrifying scene of death spreading silently. They also looked at the Tower of Glory and the young man's smiling face as he looked down. They felt a chill run down their spines. Damn it, which side was hell? Chapter 1197. Perhaps the joys and sorrows of people were interconnected at some point in time, not only from the past to the present, but also from the present realm to hell, and even from allies to the enemy. They all had the same thought. There's a traitor among us. Solano's allies, who were already used to Weischer's evil reputation, were still fine. At least they were immune to it, but the enemy's camp had never seen such an exaggerated scene. At the front line, on top of the mountain dragon's head, the six-eyed warlord's eyes almost popped out, looking at the flourishing fairyland with green grass with the naked eye. It was naturally beautiful. However, for a hell creature like him, who was born with 6 different kinds of vision, the countless overflowing poisons and curses were about to erupt. The magnificent changing colors emitted a dazzling light, rendering a shocking scarlet and pitch-black color in his eyes. Mother asterisk Kerr. His first reaction was that the B asterisk TCH, Lady Enchantress, had defected to the enemy. But soon, he realized that when the Battle of Worlds had just begun, that B asterisk TCH seemed to have been wiped out by the present realm because she moved her base too close to the front. But who else could it be other than her? Myriad-colored butterfly, eclipse veil, dark eyes, green eyes. One after another, creepy names appeared in his mind, but he quickly rejected them one by one. It wasn't that he didn't think that this could be caused by the present realm's ascendance, but such a righteous aura of disaster and the greed and brutality in the bones were the manifestation of the true essence of the abyss. Could it be that other than Leviathan, Eve Lit, and the others, the present realm had recruited new lackeys? Or could it be that there was a mole under the arcane Mountain Duke's command? A series of guesses appeared in his mind, but the tragic reality was already in front of him. In such a hurry, with such a huge loss, no matter what the truth was, he had to respond. Otherwise, what awaited him when he returned would not be Fengxing, but directly stuffed into a volcano as fuel. Now, right before his eyes, the cannon fodder he was in charge of had not even touched the edge of the city wall, but they were already harvested like the rotten weeds during the autumn harvest by the kobolds, rotting on the ground and emitting a terrible stench. Moreover, the plague was still spreading rapidly. If one were to say that biochemical weapons had no shortcomings other than being cruel and heartless, then their biggest advantage would be that they were cheap, and cheap to the point of being heartless. This was especially true for the mutated species that Huaishur had specially selected to deal with the solidification of souls and the calamities of hell. They possessed both the form of a strain and an origin substance. Thanks to the contributions of dozens of settlements over the past half a month, they had already reached the maximum rate of spread and death. If they were left alone, the cannon fodder that the Archduke had gathered from dozens of hells might all die in 2 days. Burn it! Burn them all! The six-eyed warlord roared. When it pulled the reins with all its might, the barbed rope was deeply embedded into the mountain dragon's brain, causing the giant beast to feel pain and open its mouth in madness. A huge amount of fire spurted out from the giant beast's mouth. It wasn't just this side. Almost all the armies had blazing flames. The surging heat indiscriminately splashed on the motionless or wailing monsters on the front lines. Amid the raging lava, the green grass and flowers were all burned to a crisp. The black tide surged forward once more. The monsters that had already been set ablaze began to scatter like headless flies under the threat of the warlords. One by one, they were burned to a crisp by the flames. Even more monsters stepped on the broken bones and surged forward in hunger and thirst. They breathed in the dense, poisonous air and died once more. Then, very quickly, unrecognizable corpses crawled out from the raging flames. They hissed hungrily. They staggered forward. It was as if the charcoal in the furnace had grown legs. Under the urging of their instinctive hunger and curses, they pounced towards the light of the realm. They charged forward with a vengeance. On the high tower, Huaishur's expression was as calm as ever. It was just that he felt slightly regretful. He hadn't expected to be targeted so quickly in less than a few minutes. Although the plague was useful and convenient, in the end, it could only kill them once. And it wasn't that effective against dead things. He still had unrealistic expectations of hell's moral bottom line. Unfortunately, the other party didn't seem to have that at all. Originally, in addition to the terrifying deterrence of biological and chemical weapons, it was a devastating blow to the enemy's logistics. It was fine if they were dead, but if they were alive, they would be an eternal burden. In the end, when faced with such an opponent who was alive but could still be used as dead, it could only cause a little trouble. The effect was not great. Now, with the sound of the horn filled with malice in the distance, countless corpses that had died tragically under the vicious poison were awakened. Following the remnants of their venomous hatred, countless corpses once again staggered towards the Tower of Glory. It was hard to imagine that when the two major weapons of mass destruction, they're already here and they're all dead, collided, the former would actually obtain the final victory. On the Tower of Glory, Huaishur still didn't panic. He stretched out his hand as if touching the storm blowing from afar. The wind had already arrived. Next, it was the rain. The moment the 5 fingers in the storm clenched tightly, a terrifying roar burst out from the thunderclouds. The heavenly drum was energized. The earth and the sky were like a carpet. In this sudden turbulence, there were even slight ripples. In the whistling wind, the chill gradually deepened. When the surging tide of the abyss finally touched the edge of the tower, only the figure at the top of the pale tower could be seen looking down. "It's going to rain soon. Let's go home." Huaishur lowered his eyes and thoughtfully reminded her, "The windows haven't been closed properly." Boom! The torrential rain covered everything out of thin air. At this moment, at the top of the Tower of Glory, the gloomy cloud that had been stagnant for more than half a month was like a spring that had been compressed to the extreme. It instantly expanded and exploded like a grayish-black, turbid flow that swept across the sky. In an instant, it covered the sky, causing all the light to disappear. The torrential rain poured down and swallowed everything. But what was creepy was that the heavy rain curtain didn't simply fall from the sky. It also rose from the ground. From the muddy earth, countless water droplets were pulled by an invisible gravitational force. Against gravity, they slowly rose into the sky. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops, forming a string. Thousands of strings of white frost swept across the sky. They returned to the embrace of the gloomy cloud. Wherever it passed, there were only screams and hisses. All the corpses quickly collapsed under the nourishment of the rain. It was as if they were dissolved and quickly collapsed. The remaining soul fragments flew into the sky along with the rain, converging into the dark door that was eternally dark. It was the ultimate. The ultimate was calling. It extracted life, death, and everything that had value. It greedily absorbed everything that stepped into its domain, into this huge network and cycle, fusing into one. Now, in the area shrouded by the gloomy cloud, in the darkness that was even more hellish, Yun Zhongjuan's demonic realm slowly unfolded and silently swallowed everything. When the six-eyed warlord thought that the plague that he had casually scattered was resolved, all the chickens and dogs that were sent up were also swallowed up by this torrential rain that extinguished all souls. No one would have thought that what guarded the light of the realm was such a terrifying darkness. In an instant, how many large groups were swallowed up by the gloomy rain curtain? Thousands? Tens of thousands? Or even more? How was that a dark cloud? It was clearly AF asterisk King Bottomless Black Hole. The smile that had just appeared on the six-eyed warlord's face froze. When he looked around in an attempt to get the other warlords to investigate what was going on in this strange place, he noticed that his colleagues were looking at him with cold gazes. It was as if they were looking at a dead person who was about to be stuffed into a volcano as fuel by the Demon Mountain's Archduke. F asterisk CKU, the warlord angrily cursed these unreliable dogs. He suddenly turned around and looked at the huge siege tower that was being dragged behind the mountain dragon. It was a towering altar made up of countless white bones. Magicians from hell floated in streaks of pale green light, constantly casting bloodthirsty or deranged curses at large groups of people, causing them to fearlessly charge towards the defensive line. Large amounts of spirit crystals burned in the furnace of their altar, and even more sacrifices were being beheaded from behind. A flood of heterogeneous origin substances was endlessly supplied to them, allowing them to unleash tens of thousands of times their usual strength. Even a random soul catalyst could turn countless cannon fodder into nearly unkillable berserkers. Of course, the most important task of these shamans was to resist the counterattack from the defensive line. When the six-eyed warlord saw that the other party seemed to be doing nothing, he could already feel his blood pressure rapidly rising. He flew into a rage. "What are you waiting for? Weren't you sent to deal with them?" He roared at the shaman. "Hurry up and use your secret technique to kill him." The shaman seemed to have finally come to his senses. His forearms grabbed bone ashes, flesh, and all sorts of talismans and relics. He threw them into the boiling pitch-black cauldron in front of him and stirred with all his might while muttering to himself. Within the cauldron that was filled with a large amount of blood and souls, the outline of a massive disaster gradually appeared. A terrifying shadow rose from the altar and gradually took shape. "Go, go, my son, my love. Drink the blood and feast on the souls." The shaman laughed savagely as he gazed at the dark clouds. Then he discovered that there seemed to be someone watching him from the top of the tower under the dark clouds, seemingly on guard. Are you finally afraid now? Ha! It's too late. Huaisha raised his index finger and pointed forward. And then there was no more and then. Thunder, loud noise, tremors, light, destruction, evaporation. In that short moment, all that remained in the warlord's mind were these fragmented scenes that couldn't be connected at all. Who am I? Where am I? What the F***ck happened, but when he came back to his senses and looked up in a daze, he could only see a faint dark blue trace left in the air, and the deep chasm that had been dug between the Tower of Glory and the domain of Hell, the tides formed by countless hordes of Hell, the hundreds of layers of the altar that was as solid as a rock, the shaman who had infinite power, and even the terrifying figure he summoned, along with everything on the scorched trace, all disappeared without a trace. Only pale ashes fluttered in the wind. Then the final tragic screams of the dead souls came from the wind. At the top of the tower. Huaisha scratched his head blankly, wondering if he was a little too paranoid. Just now, he seemed to have felt that someone was peeking at him, so he casually struck a bolt of lightning and subconsciously used the purification technique that Olding had taught him. In the end, it seemed a little exaggerated. Is this war? At the top of the Tower of Glory, Yun Zhongjuan looked down at the fierce battle between the present realm and Hell and faintly came to a realization. So all we need to do is cut the grass. Well, it seems quite simple. Then let's do it again. Huaisha stretched out his hand again and smiled at the six-eyed warlord in the distance, who was in a daze. Hello. Chapter 1198. A strange, illusory light flashed and disappeared. Countless free electrons formed a blue glow that danced in the air, outlining the straight afterimage. After the hurricane and torrential rain, what followed was the sound of thunder that shook all the souls in Solano's sky. At that moment, the entire world seemed to have fallen into silence. Only the thunder that was trapped in this narrow space struggled with all its might. It flew up and down, and the remaining sound became a loud noise that ravaged everyone's eardrums. When the hurricane blew past, everything that the thunder touched was instantly reduced to ashes. The large group, the army, the mountain dragon, and even the warlords all disappeared without a trace. There were no last words. Fortunately, there was no pain. They regretfully bid farewell to this world that was not beautiful. The countless bone ashes that were blown away by the wind caused the entire hell tide to stop for a moment. It slowed down visibly. The large group that was in a frenzy of hunger and thirst might not have noticed the destruction that brushed past them. The army that was immersed in the desire to kill also did not notice the terrifying light. However, in the hell tide, on top of the mountain dragon's head, the warlords clearly witnessed the end of their comrades, and their hair stood on end. They even forgot to urge and force the cannon fodder under their command to attract the firepower. Damn, where did the sniper come from? When the pair of eyes on top of the white tower looked over, they felt a chill run from their heels to the back of their heads. F***ck, this is bad. Actually, they were not the only ones who were frightened. At that moment, the sudden thunder even caused the Solano defense line's framework to sound the alarm. Such a terrifying change in origin form had actually occurred so close to them. There was no channeling, no need to brew, and no warning. It was like being 3 steps away from a ghost in the dark night, and only then noticing the strange figure behind them. Even if it had the mark of an ally, it was still enough to make one's heart skip a beat. What was even more terrifying was that when the creator in charge of the framework checked the consumption of the Tower of Glory, he realized that from the start of the battle until now, Huaisha had not used any of the origin form allotted by the Solano defense line. He had even used the Tower of Glory to replenish the defense line with more than 6,000 origin form crystals, although it was insignificant compared to the astronomical figure consumed to maintain the framework. How could there be a war where the electricity meter was reversed? Are you celestial genealogy people still King human? Now, the thunderous roar that struck fear into the hearts of both enemies and allies rose from Solano's sky and reverberated in the sky. A fleeting flash of lightning reappeared. Should it be 2 or 3 fleeting glances? No overseer had the time to consider this question. Huaishe raised his finger again. Please point at the mountain dragons or obvious targets on the bone altars. Selecting soldiers, selecting generals, riding horses to battle, selecting who, his fingers paused for a moment, and he smiled. I'll send you off. Boom. When the white tower shrouded in the torrential rain once again emitted an azure glow, many overseers felt a chill run down their spines and involuntarily wanted to scream. Like a little girl who had seen a monster, fear rose in her heart, but when they saw that the flash of lightning didn't fly towards them, they couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. They forgot the viciousness and fierceness in their hearts. Like survivors who had escaped from a monster's mouth, they wanted to hug each other and cry. But the unlucky ones who were targeted were already on the verge of tears. F***CK, why is it me? At that moment, other than the desperate questioning in their hearts, they instinctively dodged. They instantly abandoned the mountain dragon they were sitting on. The overseer, which looked like a rotten bird, spread its 5 wings and flashed with all its might. Its body twisted strangely and collapsed inward. In an instant, it disappeared on the spot and flashed hundreds of miles away. When it looked up at the flash of lightning that swallowed the mountain dragon in the distance, it began to tremble. But before it could catch its breath, it caught a glimpse of something it had never seen before in the eyes of its comrade in the distance. It was too rare in the cruel competition in hell, and it was too weak, so it didn't notice that emotion. Perhaps it could be called sympathy. Soon after, it discovered that the thing chasing after it could actually turn. Under the heavens, the lightning that had torn apart the mountain dragon, and the tide surged forward. Then, without any warning, it made a 90-degree turn. After traversing hundreds of kilometers, it opened its mouth like a giant snake and completely swallowed it. In the flying ashes, it could no longer be seen. Under the tragic lesson of the previous incident, the overseers on the mountain dragon disappeared in an instant, hiding in the endless tide. It was to the extent that some spell masters and crown wearers who reacted quickly blew out a large fog, using the dense fog to conceal their own existence, or they hid in the shadows and other domains one after another. They wouldn't show their faces even if they were beaten to death. They just crazily urged the legions and large groups under their command to attack the Tower of Glory, regardless of the cost. Curses were spilled, secret methods were used, or threats and promises were made. Now was not the time to be stingy with this group of cannon fodder. Everyone had reached a consensus that they would flatten that damned White Tower at all costs. As long as that damn thing was still there for a minute, they wouldn't dare to appear in any conspicuous places. They could only hide behind the scenes like turtles. If they delayed any longer, their temporary avoidance of the spearhead was likely to be judged as fear of war by the military judge. At that time, only the furnace of the Demon Mountain would be waiting for him. In just a few minutes, Huaishe found that he had attracted more than 40% of the hatred of the entire battlefield with his own strength. The remaining 60% were too far away and couldn't reach him for the time being. Now, countless large groups of people were risking their lives to pounce on the Tower of Glory. Every moment, every minute, every second, the number of people pouring into the rainstorm domain was constantly increasing. No matter how vast Yun Zhongjuan's rainstorm was, It was still limited to maintain the suppression of the heavenly phenomenon level and the power of a miracle. Wanting to use the power of the Tower of Glory to clean up all the opponents on the battlefield was simply as ridiculous as using a rag to wipe out an entire stadium. The pressure was rapidly increasing. Huaishur's expression gradually became serious. He suddenly discovered something that made him extremely uneasy. This is bad. He had killed too many cannon fodders. The bottomless abyss was almost unable to hold them all. These unfiltered and unconverted soul fragments contained too many calamities and impurities. If they were directly sent to the Solano defense line, it would affect the efficiency of the framework. He could only think of a way to consume them himself. What a waste! What a goddamn waste! Seeing the countless soul fragments that could be produced with just a little extraction, such as ashes, cursed crystals, bloodstones, and other materials being violently converted into modeled origin substance by the Heavenly Palace, Huaishur's heart twitched. If he had known earlier, he would have brought little 19 along. If he couldn't hold it all himself, he could have given it to him. With his master's pot of soup, how could he miss out on 2 tons of bones? Unfortunately, this child was too obedient and didn't have this fortune. What a pity! So war is actually such a costly matter. Huaishur sighed with sorrow. He once again extracted origin substance from the Heavenly Palace and reluctantly flicked out a bolt of lightning. The bolt of lightning spanned hundreds of kilometers, completely vaporizing an entire mountain dragon and the army around it. This time, he couldn't even be bothered to purify it. This kind of impure origin substance that hadn't been purified in time couldn't even undergo a third qualitative transformation. It was completely useless. However, the lightning that continued to fall from the battlefield had already torn open shocking cracks and large holes in the abyss's tide of war, until the mountain range blew out an angry breath. Under the thick mountain rocks, a large and cold ice slowly rose, locking onto the aura that had been annoying him for the past few days. So it was you, at the highest point of the mountain range. The demon Mountain Duke looked up from his throne, his scarlet eyes shining brightly. The scepter in his hand slammed down. You don't know the meaning of death. Bang! The ruler's authority descended amidst the low rumble of the collision. The night sky, which had been dyed red by the cannon fire, turned crimson amidst the countless scarlet flames. A large silhouette slowly emerged from the depths. A meteor, or an asteroid? When the tumbling boulder fell from the sky with the lava of purgatory, everyone felt their vision turn black amidst the terrifying wind pressure. It was a material fragment that had been peeled off from an entire hell. In the endless depths, in countless hells, the demon Mountain Duke had captured the spoils of war. At the same time, it was also one of the many ammunition that he had accumulated over the past few days. No, perhaps it was just a small part of it, but even so, it was enough to cause a calamity to the Tower of Glory. Now, when the terrifying impact of an astronomical phenomenon fell from the sky, a blazing light illuminated Huaishur's eyes. Unexpectedly, he didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. The premonition of death didn't move. That thing couldn't kill him, because a dazzling light that wasn't inferior to a meteor rose from the ground. Just behind Solano's defense line, in the empty restaurant, the old man picked up his wine cup again and calmly drank it all in one gulp. Beside his feet, the whistling hammer had already disappeared. When the white snow fell from the sky without any warning, a bear's roar resounded between heaven and earth. The earth roared. The shadow of the giant bear instantly appeared. It raised its huge paw and casually slapped down. It was like swatting a fly. With the support of the entire Solano's defense line, the bear god's hammer collided with the fallen hell fragment. Unexpectedly, there wasn't any loud noise. At the moment of contact, The power of the bear's paw had already smashed the boulder into dust, causing the entire battlefield to be covered in a rain of fire from the sky. Separated by countless dancing scarlet flames, the shadow of the giant bear squatted on the defense line and looked at the domain of hell. Then, it scornfully curled a finger. "What are you looking at?" Thus, the mountains were furious. "So, what if I'm looking at you?" Cracks suddenly appeared on the ground. In the darkness, countless volcanoes could be seen with the naked eye, rising 1 meter higher, then 1 meter higher. In the terrifying waves that shook the earth and the mountains, Huaisher saw that the vast domain of hell was moving one step closer to the real world. It was as if they were finally tired of this long wait. Under the mountains, strange limbs stretched out and gradually supported the terrifying weight. They stepped forward and created a hurricane that swept through the entire battlefield. Above the mountains that were covered by thick rocks and layers of steel, countless lava flowed continuously. On top of the mountains, exaggeratedly huge cannons spewed fire at the defense line. When the overwhelming waves of destruction fell from the sky, the Tower of Glory was like a small boat that was crazily shaking. The tempest that Huaisher had raised for half a month was instantly riddled with holes. Under the bombardment of the cannons, even a crack appeared on the White Tower. On top of the defense line, the protective shield was rapidly collapsing and regenerating. Countless alarms sounded in the framework. On the other side of the battlefield, terrifying waves and loud noises kept bursting out. As the bear god issued a challenge, the Grand Duke of the Magic Mountain had accepted the challenge. Chapter 1199. Suddenly, the border, which was originally wide and spacious, seemed to have become a narrow iron cage for the beasts to fight. When the mountains moved, a disaster-level hurricane reverberated in this closed box, sweeping up dust and monsters into the sky. Just like that, the mountains moved closer to Solano's defense line. With just one step, it made people feel like the whole world was coming towards them. The towering mountains shrouded everything in their shadow and looked down on them violently. There was no need for orders or scolding. There was no need for deterrence or persuasion. With just one step forward, the endless sea of monsters was pushed towards the scene. The two ends of the world seemed to be moving closer to the middle. When the battlefield gradually became narrower, the artillery fire, killing, and death gathered in this area became denser. Countless corpses had covered the ground. The monsters who had turned into corpses and killed endlessly after they died gathered into a tide and surged. They went against the layers of artillery fire, crossed the defense of the tower, and climbed onto the city wall. They crawled upwards. From afar, it looked like a black and red sticky liquid was spreading upwards. Every droplet of mist was a screaming monster, and every droplet of water that slid down was a large group of ferocious monsters. When the magic mountain shook the earth, the deep valley spread to the bottom of the city wall. Huge worms crawled out of the valley. Their thick shells and skin were destroyed by the swords and flames. They opened their huge mouths, biting and gnawing at the defense line or the shield on the tower. They opened their mouths and spat out their own descendants and other hitchhikers. Even though the enemy was close at hand and the battle was imminent, everyone could not help but be distracted and look into the distance. The burning mountains seemed to be close at hand. The mountains were still moving forward. Numerous cold eyes opened on the mountain, indifferently looking down at the dust-like one xiang before them. So King Big. Huaisher felt that he had been infected by Sandra's uncultured virus. However, he really did not expect that the Grand Duke of the Magic Mountain was really a mountain. Even if he was the ruler, this size was too exaggerated, right? But soon he noticed the difference. That was not the case. Even the mountains that had come alive were probably just his weapon. At the peak of the mountain range, he could see a gigantic soul burning ferociously like a star. The calamity that had gathered into a solid form radiated in all directions along with the soul, enveloping the entire mountain range, turning the rocks and the earth into his limbs. Conversion. Right now, the mountain range was his vehicle, his war chariot. At the same time, it was also his limbs. He was constantly converting all the materials around him and gathering them around him. He was plundering all the rocks and materials on the battlefield. Even the atmosphere created by Weisher was gradually being lost under the terrifying gravitational force. Now, as they advanced, the Grand Duke at the top of the mountains was still constantly extracting materials from the surroundings, shaping them into burning giant rocks, and throwing them at the defensive line. Then, under the bombardment of the divine marks, they turned into a meteor shower, causing a new round of heavy damage on the battlefield. When Solano's frame collided with the Demon Mountain's firepower, all living creatures were reduced to ants under the feet of the giants. They trembled under their feet, feared the shadows cast by the giants, and prayed that they would not be trampled to death by the giants. Go! Go! On top of the demonized mountains, the Grand Duke spread his arms and laughed mockingly. My children, my descendants, the time has come to establish your meritorious deeds. Now, you can go on a crusade to your heart's content. What responded to him was the high-pitched sound that gushed out from the craters of the volcanoes. In the violently surging lava, suddenly, hands reached out from the lava, dragging heavy chains and wearing heavy iron shackles. The monsters that were bound in the furnace and the flames crawled out of their cages and roared loudly. Those scarlet eyes looked at the radiance of the scene. The huge body that was dripping lava rapidly turned into a blazing light that soared into the sky. It circled in the dark sky like a living meteor. The strange half-human, half-flame giants dragged the broken chains under their feet, wantonly venting the anger of being imprisoned and the madness and power that they had accumulated over a long period of time. Damn, why do you raise children like raising dogs? Weisher was stunned and exclaimed. He did not expect the style of hell to be so unique. They actually tied their children up and threw them into the lava for fun? What was this? Was this the swimming training camp of Hell's Children's Palace? You are really good at raising children. Before Weisher could finish her praise, she sensed a malicious intent descending from the sky. When the Grand Duke of the Demon Mountain pointed in his direction, a few of the evil dogs that were wandering in the clouds suddenly looked over. Their scarlet eyes stared at him, and flames rose. In an instant, they pounced. Damn, are they so obedient? Weisher felt his scalp tingle. Was it because the poor life had smoothed out the edges of a teenager, or was it because the children in hell did not even have a rebellious period? In a short moment, the lava giants that flew up from the volcano had already turned into meteors, dragging long flame tails as they descended from the sky. The rumbling sounds were endless, and countless cracks appeared on the defense line. There was even a tower in the first line that was destroyed from the middle by the terrifying impact. And right above the Tower of Glory, several large holes were burned in the thick, dark clouds by the huge fireballs. Wrapped in terrifying temperature and mass, the molten giants had already broken into this dark domain. They caused the rainstorm to evaporate and the wind to become chaotic as they smashed straight towards the tower. Now, they don't even leash their dogs when they walk them. They don't have any civility at all. Weisher sighed. He raised his hand and gripped the invisible hilt of his sword tightly. Iron light gathered. Oh no, sir. A terrified voice suddenly came from behind. Sandra stuck her head out from under the stairs and shouted, "Oh no." Weisher subconsciously turned around. What's wrong? After saying that, he remembered that there were guests in front of him to entertain. He raised his hand and waved towards the outside of the tower. "Sorry, please wait a moment." Suddenly, he pressed the pause button. Everything came to an abrupt stop. The burning giants froze in place in the stagnant rain. Even the burning flames seemed to be frozen in the rain. The blazing flames danced and still maintained their ferocious posture. What happened? Huaishur turned around and asked. Behind him, Sandra's eyes widened. She raised a shield that was almost taller than herself and showed it in shock. Look, sir, I just realized my shield actually grew hair. It grew a lot." As she spoke, she sent the obsidian shield that had been passed down for thousands of years to Huaishur. The clusters of dark green mold covered the shield, and Huaishur's expression twitched. "At this time, you still have time to worry about this." At the same time, he couldn't help but admire the girl in front of him. To be able to be so careless. You might really be a talent. But looking at this green and lush appearance, it seems very healthy. Huaishur looked closer and suggested, "Have you considered planting a garlic sprout or something?" How could this be? Sandra's eyes widened, and she was very nervous. "It was fine when I slept yesterday, but now it's ignoring me. Is it broken? I have told you many times. Don't simply put oil on your hands after eating. It's covered in pulp, and the weather has been so humid recently. It's normal for it to grow hair. Wow, how long have you not maintained it? This smell is really strong." Huaishur leaned closer and smelled it. He felt like he was being choked by the smell. She didn't know how many people her ancestors had killed with this thing. The hatred and anger entwined on it almost condensed into a substance and overflowed. It wouldn't be strange if it grew 2 eyes one day, let alone hair. After a little inspection, she found that there was no major problem. It was just too dirty, so the jaguar stigmata didn't want to respond to her anymore. She just needed to wash it a little and apologize. After learning that her ancestral shield was not broken, and that it was just a habit of throwing tantrums, the girl immediately beamed with joy. Finally, she noticed the visitor hovering in the sky outside the tower. She was stunned for a moment. Did I disturb you?" No. Huaishur waved his hand and looked at her well-proportioned body. He nodded with satisfaction. "You came at the right time. Do me a favor." "Huh." Sandra was puzzled. Then she saw Huaishur waving his hand toward the sky. Then a rope slowly hung down from the thick, dark clouds and fell into Huaishur's hand. "I have to entertain guests here, so I don't have much free hand. I see that you are quite strong. Help me hold it first. Don't let it drift to other places." Huaishur called Sandra over and wrapped the rope of sorrow around her hand twice. He told her to hold it tightly. "It has only been half a month. It's not mature yet. It has a bad temper. Be careful." "Oh, okay. It's just a small matter. F***CK. Sandra heard and breathed a sigh of relief. But before she could finish, the moment Huaishur let go of her hand, her face suddenly changed. The power contained in the entire bloody cumulonimbus cloud exploded after it was out of Huaishur's control. In Huaishur's hand, it looked as light as a balloon, but in fact, the moment it touched his hand, it was as if he had grabbed a speeding train. It was just a moment of delay, but it almost pulled her up from the ground and threw her into the sky. Boom! The Mountain Heart's holy mark was activated, and the huge power of the giant was released from its slender body. The entire Tower of Glory was trembling under its trampling. Great strength creates miracles. The girl's face turned red. She gritted her teeth and merged herself with the entire tower, forcibly pulling the power that was about to explode. and Huaisher finally had time to look at the guests who had been neglected for a long time. He smiled. Where were we just now? He recalled the topic just now and suddenly realized, oh, I think it was about walking the dog without a leash. In the air, under the layers of rain, the molten giant seemed to feel a sudden chill from its heart. It struggled with all its might, and in the gaps of the rain, a bunch of flames spurted out. But soon, as the cold rain shrank, it disappeared without a trace. When Huaisher's hands slowly closed, strands of water spread out between his 10 fingers and merged into the rain, enveloping the molten giants in it. Then gently it closed in the middle. Ka, ka, ka. When the 10 slender fingers crossed and slowly closed, the mass of the entire Chalcedony hall descended from the medium of the rain, cruelly squeezing inwards and shrinking every inch of space. A hair-raising sound came from behind the pale rain, but soon it was drowned out by the noise. It was like magic. The magician took out a curtain and covered the rabid dogs that chose to eat people. Then, with a clap of his hands, the rabid dogs disappeared. It was so magical. In the end, when Huaisher opened his hands again, a dazzling lightning appeared in his palms. Only the pale lightning that had been purified by the ultimate and celestial palace was left on his fingertips. It was so tame. But just by existing here, it emitted a blazing light that wanted to burn all the darkness completely. Now, Huaisher raised his fingers again. Under the lightning, he made a pose like a gun aiming at the slowly approaching mountains in the darkness. Towards the peak of the mountains, the Demon Mountain Duke, Huaisher called out softly, "Look here, bastard." Pa! He pulled the invisible trigger. Chapter 1200. For a moment, the entire battlefield fell into a dead silence. However, it was definitely not because of Huaisher's call that was drowned out by the noise. Instead, it was because of an even louder and more powerful roar. It was as if a tsunami was rolling in the sky. Majestic echoes came from behind the dark clouds, spreading far and wide. The loud noise from the fierce light easily suppressed all the other noises that were not worth mentioning. What was even faster than the sound was the lightning that was faster than the speed of light. Countless tiny electric charges were transferred and exchanged in one place, forming the main body of a grand miracle. When this lightning that was extracted from countless disasters flew out from Huaisher's fingertip, it quickly expanded, stretched, and spread, revealing its original appearance and ferocious outline. Blue water spread out from the tip of his finger like a surging river. In the loud noise of the 7 seas breaking the dam, the lightning turned into a flood, crossing the dark clouds, hurricanes, torrential rain, flames, and everything else. It was vast and mighty, swallowing everything in its path. The rolling water of the Yangtze River flowed to the east. The hatred of eternity reappeared in the lightning that was purified to the 9th degree, dyeing this pure source substance with a layer of ominous darkness. The lightning was like iron. It plowed through the ground, cut through the air, penetrated the mountains, and split the lava. It tore the majestic walls and the magnificent palace apart and flew in. In an instant, it engulfed the ruler on the throne. The smile that had just appeared froze on his face. Gradually, he turned pale. At this moment, under the shadow of the Demon Mountain, the entire Solano defense line was shaking under the bombardment of the cannons and meteors. The ground, the sky, and the countless insects in front of him. Everything was trembling under the shadow of the Demon Mountain. The humiliation that he had endured for the past few days was being returned to him 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. Now, you will pay the price. However, just as he was concentrating on fighting against Solano's frame, a backstab came down from the sky without any warning. It was as if the backstab was afraid that Solano would not see it. The backstab directly hit Solano's face. Splat! His dignified and luxurious clothes were instantly torn apart, and cracks appeared on his most treasured crown. A shocking pitch-black color appeared on his face that was as hard as rock. Deathly silence. A sudden deathly silence appeared in the palace. Only the Archduke of Fiend Mountain was holding a broken wine cup in his hand. The amber-black wine that came from hell slowly dripped onto the ground. A sizzling sound was heard. Even though Yun Zhongjuan's attack had traveled such a long distance, it did not cause any decent damage. Like a rotten egg, it was impossible to break through his defense. Well, that is, if you ignore the insults that were enough to drive people crazy. When the Archduke of Demon Mountain turned around expressionlessly and looked at the Tower of Glory through the cracks in the palace, the killing intent from the ruler formed a tangible pressure. Under the gaze of that pair of scarlet eyes, all of the spirits felt an unprecedented sense of fear and trepidation, as if they were being torn apart. The wrath of the Grand Duke of Devil Mountain descended. Huaishur, on the other hand, seemed to have finally reacted. He was still in the same position as when he committed the crime. My hand slipped. The young man was stunned for a moment before he smiled and revealed an innocent and pure expression. He sincerely apologized. I'm sorry, don't be angry. You won't stoop to my level, right? No way, right? No way, right? No one will stoop to the level of a child like me, right? Being stared at with such a sincere expression, the Archduke of Fiend Mountain was slightly stunned. For a moment, he actually had a strange illusion. It was as if there was a familiar voice whispering in his ear, "Bear with it. Isn't this very normal? When you drive around showing off your house, it's hard to avoid a stinky child smashing your windows. Who knows, he might even step on the cement floor that you just mopped, pull out the bamboo that you planted, step on your wall to pee, and then whistle at you. You can't help but want to stomp this little bastard to death like a light bulb. But even if you catch him on the spot, what can you do? The child is still young, and he has already apologized to you. How can you do this? How old are you? How can you be so calculative with a child? Aren't you ashamed? Of course, if you are really unhappy and feel that you can't take this lying down at the top of the Tower of Glory, Huaishur was still smiling sincerely, but his 5 fingers, which were originally in the shape of a pistol, slowly contracted and clenched into a fist. Finally, he flipped his middle finger smoothly. Then why don't you come and kill me? There was a moment of dead silence. Everyone who looked up at this scene subconsciously held their breaths. Then, the moment they reacted, they didn't even care about the whips and sharp blades of the inspection team. They fled in horror, because the volcano was roaring in anger. Countless scorching poisonous fog and lava spewed out from the cracks of the mountains, burning the sky red. The world in the eyes of the ruler was instantly covered with a layer of scarlet. His eyes were blood red. After so many years, he once again felt this uncontrollable anger. Even if his rationality told him that it was just a small trick not worth mentioning. Before the enemy, he couldn't be distracted. He had to endure. Endure for 3 years. Endure F*** your mother. In that instant, ignoring the tower of transformation that was right in front of them, the raging mountains actually changed directions and charged towards the Tower of Glory. Kill this little bastard. Long before the shadow of the mountains fell, the Grand Duke in the palace had already raised the scepter in his hand and pointed it at Huaishur. The relic of authority, which was made by the remains of the fallen ruler, shone with an evil light. The huge Tower of Glory was instantly shrouded in an unprecedented vibration. In the roar, countless cracks spread up the tower. Yun Zhongjuan's domain was instantly torn apart by the impact of the relic. In the dark domain that was out of his control, countless stones and soil boiled and surged. A huge skull that was like a mountain rose from the ground. its eyes burning with scarlet flames. The mountain was the bone, and the fire was the soul. The skeleton of the mountain serpent reappeared here and temporarily revived. Its huge body slithered out and wrapped around the tower, completely cutting off the connection between the Tower of Glory and Solano. The huge serpent's head fell from the broken dark clouds and looked down at the insignificant opponent in front of it. It opened its mouth, and in the darkness of nothingness, endless disasters surged and turned into destructive flames. The Grand Duke of the Demon Mountain laughed viciously. Die! This at the top of the tower. Huaisher looked up at the huge creature in front of him in shock and couldn't react for a moment. He seemed to be surprised that the enemy's revenge came so quickly. He was also surprised that the enemy lacked common sense. Don't you know that if you hit a child, the parents will come? When the serpent's head spat out poisonous flames and the premonition of death appeared in his mind again, he didn't panic at all. He even looked at the Grand Duke of the Demon Mountain's ferocious expression and wanted to laugh. This distance should be enough, right? There was a flash of light. Something seemed to fall from the sky and hit beside Huaisher's feet, wedged into the iron and stone, and made a buzzing sound. The serpent's head was stunned for a moment, and the destructive flames that were brewing in its throat disappeared without a trace. When it looked down blankly, it saw what had pierced through its broken body. It was a hammer? The frosty hammer was embedded in the top of the Tower of Glory, and it roared hungrily among the countless runes. Sticky blood slowly dripped down. Then, a loud sound broke out from the sky. In the late hurricane, the huge serpent's body shook, and the skeleton that was hastily created crumbled like sand, turning into ashes and dissipating in the wind. But no one cared about the changes here, because there was an even more shocking change right in front of the Tower of Glory. The ground shook, and the mountain shook. The sky fell, and the earth cracked. A literal abrupt scene descended in an instant. Right on the left side of the Demon Mountain, the towering defense line collapsed. Under the impact of the huge creature, countless huge rocks flew out like a storm. It was so impatient. It did not even bother to wait for the frame to open the door for itself. It dashed, galloped, and even crashed. When the spreading hurricane blew away the thick smoke, a ferocious silhouette appeared. It was a terrifying size that was not inferior to the Demon Mountain. Countless rocks and soil transformed into an armored bear. When the huge body that absorbed most of the power of Solano's defense line straightened its body, it cast a pitch-black shadow downwards. It shrouded the Grand Duke of the Demon Mountain's dull face. What a coincidence! The burning giant bear grinned like a human. We meet again. The passionate call did not get a response in time, because right after that, the bear-shaped artillery shell that was launched by Solano's defense line, with all its strength, had brazenly crashed into the mountains. Hug 1. Then, the purest collision between matter and matter-caused waves that were enough to shake the entire defense line. The waves rose to the sky, spread in all directions. F***CK. Huaisher only felt that his vision turned black. He only had time to press Sandra, who was in a daze beside him, to the ground and crawl. Then he felt the turbulent waves sweep past his back. The sudden impact caused sticky blood to seep out of his mouth and nose. However, before it could flow down, it had completely evaporated in the wind. If it were not for the protection of the hammer, the Tower of Glory, which bore the brunt of the impact, would have been flung away by the terrifying impact. The ground shattered, and the deep rift valley extended from east to west, instantly extending thousands of miles. The sounds of mountains collapsing rang out incessantly. Under such a pure impact, the towering Devil Mountain could no longer support its gigantic body. it started to crumble to the side, causing countless rocks and fragments to fly up into the air, scattering towards the battlefield without any pattern. The monsters who had struggled to climb back up from the waves of destruction were once again faced with a calamity of annihilation. Such terrifying destruction caused many huge cracks to appear on the giant bear's body. It could no longer maintain its exaggerated size. Even the guardian of the earth had its limits and could not expand endlessly. However, the old man did not care about this at all. After pushing Fiend Mountain to the ground with a single wave, he rode on top of the armored mountain and relied purely on his own weight to suppress Fiend Mountain's movements. Then he raised his two bare paws and swung them down on the struggling Fiend Mountain without mercy. Slap! 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 The giant claws formed by pure steel and obsidian would smash a huge crack on the demon mountain every time it slammed down. Every time it raised its paws, it would pull something down, or it might as well pull an entire volcano out of the demonized mountain. Open its stomach. The bear god's stigmata and the bear god's authoritative relics, together with the Solano defense line's endless supply of source form, formed a terrifying destructive power that could be seen with the naked eye, until the continuous huge impact, the Demon Mountain Grand Duke, who was pressed down on the ground, finally reacted. It roared angrily and controlled the volcano to counterattack the giant bear. However, the hand of lava pierced through the giant bear's body without any resistance. It was as if it had torn apart an insignificant bubble. Immediately after, countless soil and rocks collapsed from the lava giant's hands and slid down. The giant bear disintegrated and disappeared. However, when the Demon Mountain Grand Duke was in disbelief, he saw a cold light emerging from the collapsed soil and rocks. At the top of the Tower of Glory, the giant hammer suddenly rose into the air and flew into the distance. It easily pierced through countless rocks that did not fall down in time and fell into the hands of the old man, who was grinning ferociously. The old man who descended from the sky had already jumped into the palace. In midair, the old man raised the hammer and aimed it at the Demon Mountain's stiff face. The strength of the bear. Smash! Chapter 12:01. Are you F*** King done? The Archduke of the Demon Mountain felt that he was about to have a mental breakdown. He had plundered so many cannon fodder during this period of time, and even created a full set of top-grade equipment. He had thought that he had the advantage with 8 million against 600,000. However, from the beginning of the war, it had been strange. Those people that he had disdained to look at in the eye in the past had started to jump around under his nose, which made him furious. He had used a large number of cannon fodder for so long, but they had not even touched the city walls. When he could not stand it anymore and went into battle himself, he realized that the other side had no morals at all. It was all AF *King trick. At this moment, he saw a big, loathsome bald man jump out with a hammer. His eyes were wide open. Damn it, didn't we agree to have a fair competition? How shameless! But now he could no longer hesitate in front of the Iron Light Shop. In his hand, he suddenly swung his scepter horizontally, sweeping across with a heavy force. The bear god's power collided with the weight of the Demon Mountain, and the surging airwaves completely covered the palace that the Archduke of the Demon Mountain had built for hundreds of years in dust. Seeing his countless collections and contributions being buried in the dust, the Archduke of Fiend Mountain looked at Richard with eyes that were burning red and shining. F***CK, there was a path to heaven, but you did not take it. If Richard had really insisted on guarding Solano's front like a few days ago, he might have had a headache. But now Richard was so arrogant that he dared to step into his territory. Did he really think that he was a weak chicken that could be trampled upon after getting close? This was simply reckless. The Archduke of the Demon Mountain laughed hideously. With a shake of his scepter, he blocked the bear god's hammer. Then, layers of heavy armor covered the incomplete, solemn robe. Under the influence of the ruler's will, the mountains trembled as boundless power gathered. He easily suppressed the bear god. The scepter with a sharp blade in his hand had turned into an ancient mottled heavy sword, showing its sharpness again. Before he was awarded the Demon Mountain from the Sea of Thunder, he was a gray blood knight who had dominated hell. Seeing that his opponent's aura was getting stronger and stronger, Richard's smile became more and more cheerful. His white beard rose like flames, moving without wind. "Yes, brother." He wiped the blood from the wound on his arm and laughed. "This is exciting." A dazzling halo appeared above his head. The origin substance from Solano's defensive line descended from the sky, causing the image of the giant bear to appear once again. This inhuman power continued to rise without limit. Of course, if he used the bear god's transformation, it would be easier for him to deal with a huge opponent. However, the Archduke of Demonic Mountain before him was best at transforming matter and eroding the essence of things. If he was foolish enough to use such a cumbersome form to fight against him, then he would truly be courting death. Perhaps in the end, he would also become a part of the Demon Mountain. How could it compare to swinging a hammer to open a ladle? Furthermore, he paused for a moment, and his smile became even more mocking. When did I say that I was alone? 10,000 feet of bloody flames suddenly descended from the deathly still night sky. From the scarlet pillar of fire, a skinny man holding a spear walked out. He seemed to have gone through a long battle, and there was still a big hole in his chest. Under the broken human skin, one could only see endless blood surging, vaguely forming a vague outline. Hepatotech, the Skinner. After a long wait, powerful reinforcements from the American lineage descended from the sky. "You took so long." The bear god grinned. "I almost couldn't wait and went to die alone." "Don't be in such a hurry, Richard. I rushed here as fast as I could." The Skinner held an obsidian knife and a spear in his hands. The blood under his feet surged like a sea, reflecting his cold smile and the illusion of countless struggling corpses. "When I came, the feathered serpent told me to tell you to act quickly. He said, 'Things might change if you delay.' You dare to oppose me on Demonic Mountain with just 2 people?" Seeing that the other party was confident in defeating him, the Archduke of Demonic Mountain was so angry that he almost laughed out loud. "Very good, very good. Today, I'll let you experience the power of the Sea of Thunder." Accompanied by a hoarse roar, the sound of thunder burst out from the deepest part of Demonic Mountain. A new power burst out from the huge mountain formed by endless lava. Pure darkness rose from his body. Under the siege of both parties, he did not move at all, and the boundless gravitational force once again burst out. As the ruler, the authority that he was given was to transform and absorb. To be precise, it was to gather. He gathered all the power of hell on his body. Even if countless specks of dust gathered in one place, they would be able to pile up into a towering demonic mountain. As long as Demonic Mountain was still there, he would not be lacking. Instead, he had the advantage. When the high-pitched horns sounded from the top of the mountain again, the order from the Archduke of Demonic Mountain was transmitted to the souls of every large group and army without any hindrance. He ordered all the monsters to risk their lives and attack the defense line that was close at hand. From the crack in the mountain, countless black tides flowed out again, densely clinging to Solano's defense line like a swarm of ants. The battle between the 2 sides did not stop temporarily because of the battle between the 3 of them. Instead, it became more and more intense. At every moment, there was an endless amount of blood being spilled. Death was a rare and common phenomenon that descended upon everyone's heads. when Demonic Mountain and the defense line overlapped, there was no longer any depth to the battlefield. Only the most direct killing was left. From high up in the sky, there was only black and red dancing constantly, stirring up bubbles and ripples in the boiling cauldron of war. The Archduke of Demonic Mountain laughed hoarsely. He could feel that his territory was expanding with the large group of attacks. Countless deaths and corpses merged into the land of Demonic Mountain, bringing him endless— Wait, why did it suddenly stop? In the battle, his movements slowed down for a moment, and his helmet was almost hit by the bear god's giant hammer. Just as he was about to retaliate, he realized that the supply from Demonic Mountain was actually F***King stopped again. This time, he was not so lucky. The Skin Flayer's Viper Spear instantly pierced through the crack in his armor, leaving a rotting wound on his chest that was bleeding nonstop. However, in his haste to dodge, the tip of his nose smelled a refreshing floral fragrance amidst the smoke and the stench of lava. It was so fragrant and sweet. No matter how subtle it was still mesmerizing. When he closed his eyes, this vigorous state of life and all things appeared before his eyes. However, when he turned around, he could not help but widen his eyes in anger. Bastard! At this moment, at the peak of Demonic Mountain, in the scorched land that was covered in sulfur, clusters of dazzling green plants were growing and expanding rapidly. With the help of the rain and blood that fell from the sky, they took root and sprouted. From afar, it looked like a hat that was full of vitality. Countless fresh flowers emerged from it, twining around the corpses and growing vigorously. Looking from afar, it was mesmerizing for a moment. In the midst of the beautiful flowers and plants, the hard-working gardener seemed to have sensed his furious gaze. He raised his head and showed an honest smile. "Fellow townsmen, I'm here again. I'm going to kill you." The Archduke of Demonic Mountain roared hoarsely. He forcibly diverted his attention and raised his giant mountain hand to press down on him. However, that annoying smile instantly flickered and disappeared from the shadows. In an instant, he appeared in another place and began to plant grass. He could not catch up at all. Now, the biosphere from Great Seeming had followed Huaishur's continuous shadow burial and scattered all over Demonic Mountain. Taking advantage of the chaos of war, it appeared and disappeared mysteriously from one battlefield to another. It didn't bother with any of the enemies and only scattered countless vitality along the way, burying it in the ground. Then, patches of bloodthirsty plants rapidly took root and sprouted, connecting with each other and absorbing the power that originally belonged to the Demon Mountain, growing wildly. Green. Everything was F***King green. What shocked him even more was not that the supply of origin substance from the battlefield had decreased, but that the connection between him and Demonic Mountain had begun to weaken along with the growth of countless flowers and plants. It was as if there was an invisible knife hidden under the thick mountain, patiently cutting off all the veins that he buried one by one. What followed was the weakening of his soul. It was as if a small hole had been cut open. It was as if a straw had reached in and greedily brought the essence of disaster to an unknown place. Something was quietly eating away at him. But he was being entangled by two damned fellows and had no way of escaping. Just thinking of this possibility made his hair stand on end. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of moving the battlefield, but every time he thought of doing so, the Skin Flayers seemed to be able to predict the future and would look in the direction he wanted to move to, blocking and intercepting him in advance. At the same time, the bear god would attack like a madman, forcing him to focus all his attention on dealing with it. Huaishur was in charge of flirting not far away to attract his attention. "Come and hit me. Come and hit me. Hey, you can't hit me. Are you angry? Let me ask you, are you angry?" At this moment, in the belly of the mountain, between the endless forks and the maze, the dark caves and corridors were covered in moss and countless vines. Darkness! The darkness of the ultimate spread like a flood, silently seeping into every corner of the world. Feeling the pure essence of the abyss and the heavy disaster of hell continuously flowing into his palace, Huaishur could not help but excitedly rub his little hands together. I've profited a lot this time. Now, he did not even feel the heartache of wasting the impurities. He had no choice but to do so. In any case, there was no way he would fight, not in this lifetime. Only by planting grass and flowers could he maintain his livelihood. There were so many defensive lines and divine marks on the main battlefield. They did not lack one. Furthermore, his level was not high enough for the Demon Mountains Duke, so he would only be a hindrance if he went. It was better to go deep into the enemy's rear and bring back some wild food. When he thought of this, he immediately controlled his palace and sucked 2 mouthfuls into the Demon Mountain. This was the sole origin of the ruler, the seed of the abyss he needed for his advancement. Even if it was too little compared to the amount he needed for his advancement, it was at least meat. Why would he still need the ruler's remains? Wouldn't it be better if it was freshly cut? Now, he looked at the Demon Mountains Duke with a gaze as gentle as water. He could not wait to go back to the ivory tower and call for people to capture him and raise him. Otherwise, where would he find someone so easy to suck from in all of hell? It was a pity that the attributes did not match, so it was useless even if he sucked too much. When he thought of this, he sighed regretfully and turned back to instruct the crows. Take it gently, Caw. Be careful. Don't bump into anything. Holy! The crows shouted and responded in unison. At this moment, a group of crows carrying a complete set of 80% new Calamity Furnace quietly passed by the edge of the battlefield. Then another group of crowmen carrying huge treasure chests also quietly passed by. Then another group, and another group. Under the Archduke of Fiend Mountain's indignant gaze, his treasures, his collection, his spoils of war, and even the pants he had just changed into yesterday were all carried away by a group of arrogant crowmen right before his eyes as if they were demolishing a house. Seeing his assets evaporate at such a rapid speed, the Fiend Mountain Grand Duke was on the verge of tears. He did not know when, but the rage in his heart had turned into a helpless pleading. Don't move, I beg you, don't move, leave some for me. As if they had heard his prayer, after an unknown amount of time, no more crows came out of the hole. Oh, no, there was still one behind, carrying his throne. Damn it! You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.